Be me. My name is Helen. I'm almost 60 years old. I'm not the kind of person who uses sites like this. My world has always been one of community meetings, printed newsletters and phone calls. But the world I knew is gone, and I don't know where else to turn to tell this story. I need to write it down, to put it out there, so I can try to understand it myself. This all started a few months ago, on a Tuesday, I think. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers I'd printed out. They were bank statements, my daughter's bank statements. And as I looked at the numbers, I felt this cold, heavy feeling in my chest. It was the feeling of watching something you built over a lifetime get systematically dismantled and set on fire. To understand, you have to know who I was, who I still thought I was until recently. In the 80s, I was what you'd call an activist. Not the kind you see today, just shouting into a camera. We organized. I spent a rainy autumn marching with my fellow paralegals and legal secretaries, demanding our firm give us the same pay as the men doing comparable work. I remember the feeling of the cold rain on my face and the warmth of the woman next to me sharing her thermos of coffee. We weren't angry for the sake of it. We were angry because we saw an injustice and we wanted to fix it. We believed in fairness. We weren't anti-man. We were pro-woman. There's a difference. We fought for the right to be seen as equals. In the office, at home, in the eyes of the law. We wanted a seat at the table, not to flip the table over. My ex-husband, Chloe's father, marched with me on more than one occasion. We were partners. Our eventual divorce had nothing to do with our ideals, just the usual story of two people growing apart. I poured all those beliefs into my daughter, Chloe. I raised her to be strong, independent, and self-reliant. I taught her that her value wasn't tied to a man's approval or his income. I wanted her to be able to stand on her own 2 feet, to build a life for herself on her own terms. I thought I was giving her armor. I didn't realize I was giving her a weapon. Chloe was always bright. In school, she was sharp, quick-witted, and popular. She had this way of making people listen to her. She could be incredibly persuasive. I was so proud. I saw the future in her, a woman who would never have to put up with the nonsense my generation did. The first signs of change started when she went off to college. It was a good school, and she was studying sociology and communications. We'd talk on the phone, and she'd use words and phrases I recognized, but the meaning felt different. She talked about patriarchy and empowerment, but it sounded less like a call for justice and more like a business plan. I remember one conversation in particular. She was telling me about a class project where they analyzed advertising. I told her about how we used to protest companies that used degrading images of women to sell products. She laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a dismissive one. She said that was an old way of thinking. The new way wasn't to protest the male gaze, but to seize control of it and monetize it. She called it reclaiming her power by turning the system back on itself. It sounded clever, I guess, like something a professor would say, but it left me feeling uneasy. It sounded so cynical. After graduation, she got her own place in the city. It was a nice apartment, nicer than I could afford at her age. She told me she was a freelance social media consultant and an online content creator. It was all very vague. I was just happy she was independent and successful. When I'd ask for details, she'd talk about building her brand, engagement metrics, and leveraging her online presence. It was a language I didn't really understand, but it sounded professional. The gifts started coming. An expensive purse for my birthday, a high-end coffee machine for Christmas. I'd ask her, "Chloe, you shouldn't be spending this much money on me." She'd just smile and say her business was doing really well. She was a CEO of her own life, she said. I was proud, but a little voice in the back of my head was getting louder. Something felt off. There was a coldness to her success, a transactional quality that I couldn't put my finger on. The day it all came crashing down was a weekend she came to visit. It was maybe late spring. The flowers were out. She seemed a bit stressed, constantly on her phone, typing furiously. She had to take a few work calls in her old bedroom. Sunday morning, she went out for a run. She left her laptop open on the dining room table. I was just clearing away the breakfast dishes when the screen lit up with a notification. I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear. My intention was just to close the lid. But my eyes caught the screen. It wasn't a social media page. It was a spreadsheet. I've been a legal secretary and office manager my whole life. I know my way around a spreadsheet. This one was meticulously organized. There were columns for names, or rather usernames. Kevin_78, Mike P_dev, Lonely Architect. Next to them were columns for monthly tribute, tier level, and payment method. The numbers were staggering, hundreds, in some cases thousands, of dollars per month. But it was the last column that made my blood run cold. It was labeled Psychological Profile and Vulnerabilities. I leaned closer. My hands were shaking. I read the entries. For Kevin_78, extreme loneliness. Recently divorced, wife cheated. Low self-esteem, craves female validation. Responds well to good boy praise. Weakness, his dog Buster. Mention Buster to build rapport. For Mike P_dev, nice guy complex. Believes he's unappreciated. Hates corporate culture. Responds to anti-establishment. And you're not like the other guy's narratives. Weakness, intellectual insecurity. Compliment his big brain. It went on and on. Dozens of men, each one dissected and cataloged not as a person, but as a collection of weaknesses to be exploited. It was a predator's playbook. I felt dizzy. I had to sit down. I used the trackpad to look around the desktop. There were folders. One was called GFE Scripts. I opened it. It was full of documents with titles like Caring GF Conversation Tier 3, Argument and Makeup Script Tier 4, and Future Pacing Conversation, Vegas Trip. They were word-for-word scripts for her to perform, to create a completely fake sense of intimacy and connection. Another folder was Tribute Incentives. It detailed what each man would unlock at different payment levels. $100 a month got you a personalized good morning text. $500 got you a weekly emotional check-in call. For $2,000, she would pretend to be your girlfriend online, commenting on your posts and defending you in arguments. This wasn't content creation. This was a sophisticated emotional manipulation scheme designed to prey on lonely and vulnerable men. The empowerment she talked about was the power to drain a man's bank account by selling him a fantasy. I must have sat there for an hour just clicking through files, each one making me feel sicker than the last. The sheer scale of it, the cold, calculated cruelty. These weren't just usernames on a screen. They were people. People with jobs, families, and feelings. And my daughter was treating them like oil wells to be pumped dry. I found the chat logs she had with another girl, another creator. They were laughing. They shared tips on how to maximize tribute velocity from new clients. They called the men pay pigs and simps and walking ATMs. They joked about one man who sold his comic book collection to stay in Chloe's top tier. My daughter had replied with 3 laughing emojis. The woman I raised, the girl I taught to fight for justice and respect, was laughing at someone's desperation. When Chloe got back from her run, flushed and happy, she found me at the table. She saw the laptop screen and her smile vanished. For a second, just a second, I saw a flash of panic in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by a calm, hard mask. She didn't say anything. She just walked over, closed the laptop lid slowly, and sat down opposite me. I didn't know what to say. I started with, "Chloe, What is this? She took a deep breath. It's my business, Mom. This isn't a business, I said, my voice trembling. This is cruel. You're lying to these people. You're taking advantage of them. And that's when she gave me the speech. It was smooth, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it in her head for years. She told me it was no different than any other business. She was providing a service, and her clients were willing customers. She said they were all adults who were making their own choices. I tried to argue. I told her about the men I'd helped over the years at the women's shelter. The good ones, the husbands and fathers who were victims of circumstance, who were just trying their best. I told her that equality means seeing the humanity in everyone, not just using their weaknesses against them. She just shook her head. You don't get it, Mom. The world isn't fair. You fought for your little slice of fairness, and what did it get you? A part-time job at a nonprofit and a tiny apartment. I'm playing the game as it's played now. Men have held all the power for centuries. Financial power, social power. Now the tables are turning. I'm just using the tools available to me. It's empowerment. Empowerment? I was almost shouting now. How is it empowering to build your success on someone else's pain, on the loneliness of a man who just wants someone to talk to about his dog? She looked at me, and her eyes were completely cold. It was like looking at a stranger. That's his problem, not mine. If he's willing to pay for a fantasy because his real life is empty, that's a market opportunity. I'm a businesswoman. I'm capitalizing on a market inefficiency. You should be proud. I wasn't proud. I was horrified. The ideals I had spent my life fighting for, respect, dignity, equality, she was using them as buzzwords to justify a business model that was based on the complete absence of all three. She had taken the language of liberation and turned it into the language of exploitation. The conversation ended there. There was nothing left to say. A huge, silent chasm had opened up between us right there at the dining room table. She packed her bag and left a few hours later. The hug she gave me at the door was brief and stiff. For days I couldn't function. I felt like a failure, not just as a mother, but as a feminist, as a believer in the cause I had dedicated my life to. I looked at the old photos on my mantelpiece. Me at a protest, me with my friends from the shelter, a smiling Chloe in her graduation gown. It all felt like a lie. I realized I couldn't just let it go. I had to understand. I had to see the other side of this, the human cost of Chloe's business. I remembered the name from the spreadsheet, the biggest name, the one with the most detailed notes. Kevin_78. I had to find him. I had to see the man my daughter was methodically breaking. Finding him was disturbingly easy. I just typed the username into a search engine. His profile on a popular photo-sharing site popped up immediately. The profile picture was of him, a man in his late 30s, I'd guess, with a friendly, slightly shy smile. He was standing on a hiking trail, and a happy-looking golden retriever was sitting at his feet. Buster, I presumed. I spent the next hour scrolling through his life. It was all there, laid out in public, photos of his dog, posts about his struggles learning a new coding language for his job, pictures of meals he cooked for himself, looking a little lonely on a plate for one. He shared articles about science and technology. He never posted anything angry or political. He just seemed like a quiet, decent, and profoundly lonely man. And woven through it all were Chloe's posts. He shared everything she put online, her selfies, her little video clips, her rambling thoughts on pop culture. He would add captions like, "Such an inspiring voice for modern women," or, "Chloe is one of the few people who really gets it." He would comment on her photos with messages of support and encouragement. It was obvious he wasn't just a fan. He was in love with the idea of her. He genuinely believed he had a special connection with the person she was pretending to be. I saw a post from a few months back. It was a picture of a classic, restored muscle car. The caption was full of pride. He wrote about how he and his dad had spent years working on it before his dad passed away. It was his prized possession. Seeing his face, seeing his life, made the spreadsheets feel 1,000 times worse. This wasn't a faceless client in a business transaction. This was a real person with a history and feelings. My daughter was systematically draining the life and resources out of this man, and he was thanking her for it. He thought he was supporting an artist, an entrepreneur. He had no idea he was the mark in a long con. I felt this desperate need to talk to someone who might understand. Not a therapist, but someone who was there with me, back in the beginning. I called Judith. Judith and I had known each other for 40 years. We met stuffing envelopes for a political campaign in our early 20s. She became a lawyer, a fierce one, specializing in family law. We'd seen each other through marriages, divorces, and raising our kids. If anyone understood the ideals we fought for, it was her. We met for coffee at a little place we used to go to. I told her everything. I didn't hold back. I told her about the OnlyFans, the spreadsheets, the scripts, the manipulation. I told her about Kevin and his dog. When I finished, I felt exhausted and ashamed, like I was confessing my daughter's sins as my own. Judith just listened, stirring her coffee slowly. She wasn't shocked. That was the most terrifying part. She just looked tired. When I was done, she put her spoon down and looked me straight in the eye. She said that she sees this every single day in her practice. Not the online part, maybe, but the sentiment behind it. She told me about the young women in divorce proceedings who openly state they see marriage as a financial stepping stone. She talked about the complete and total lack of empathy she sees, the view that men are not partners, but resources to be managed and eventually liquidated. She said something that has been stuck in my head ever since. She told me, "Helen, we marched for equality. We wanted a partnership. We wanted to be seen as capable and whole. What they want is power. They want control. They took our language of liberation and twisted it into a language of entitlement. We wanted to build a bridge between men and women. They've armed one side with our work and declared war." Sitting there across from my oldest friend, I felt a profound sense of grief. It wasn't just about Chloe anymore. It was about everything. We had sincerely believed we were making the world better. But it was like we'd planted a garden, and a new generation had come along and only harvested the poisonous weeds to use as weapons. I went home from that coffee feeling validated, but also more hopeless than ever. Judith's words echoed in my mind. We wanted to build a bridge. They declared war. A week or so later, the final blow came. I had continued, almost obsessively, to check Kevin's social media profile. It was a morbid form of self-punishment. I was watching my daughter's work in real time. One evening, he posted a new photo. It was a picture of an empty space in his driveway, with a small oil stain on the concrete. The caption read, "Said goodbye to an old friend today." It was hard, but it's time to invest in the future. Poured the proceeds into supporting an amazing creator who was building her own empire. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to build a better future. He had sold the car he'd restored with his father. I felt the air leave my lungs. I went back to the files I had seen on Chloe's laptop in my mind. I remembered the script titled Future Pacing Conversation. I remembered the chat logs where she and her friend joked about getting one of their whales to sell an asset. This wasn't Kevin's idea. This was Chloe's. She had planted this idea in his head. She had manipulated him into selling one of the few things that seemed to bring him genuine joy and connection to his past. All so she could have more money. That was it. That was the line. This was no longer just about lies and money. This was about destruction. She was hollowing this man out piece by piece. I knew I had to confront her one last time, not to change her mind. I knew by then that was impossible, but to hold her accountable, to stand up for this stranger because no one else would. I printed everything out, the spreadsheet entry for Kevin, screenshots of his profile, a picture of the car from his old post, and a picture of his new post about selling it. I even printed the chat logs where she laughed about it. I put it all in a neat stack on my dining room table. Then I called her and asked her to come over. I said it was important. My voice was calm, but inside I felt like a building was collapsing. She arrived that evening, looking stylish and confident. She probably thought I was going to apologize. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the stack of papers on the table. She walked over and looked down. She picked up the photo of Kevin's car, then the photo of the empty driveway. She shuffled through the chat logs. Her face was unreadable. There was no shame, no guilt, just a faint flicker of annoyance, like I was a problem she needed to solve. I finally spoke. My voice was low and steady. His father helped him build that car. It was the last thing he had of him, and you made him sell it. She put the papers down and crossed her arms. She didn't deny it. He's a grown man, Mom. He made a choice. It wasn't a choice, I shot back. It was a carefully engineered outcome. You found his weaknesses, you built a fantasy, and you fed it to him until he was willing to sell his own memories to keep it going. That's not a choice. That's predation. She actually scoffed, a small, ugly sound. She said that the whole world runs on predation. Corporations sell people things they don't need by exploiting their insecurities. The government sells them on wars. This was no different, just on a smaller scale. She told me she was a product of the world I had helped create, a world where everything is a transaction. I told her that was a coward's excuse. I told her I had raised her to be better than that, to have a conscience, to see the humanity in people. And then she said the words that finally, completely severed the bond between us. She looked at me, not with anger, but with something like pity. You still don't get it. Your entire generation fought to be seen. You wanted a seat at the table. That was your mistake. You wanted their permission. I don't want a seat at their table. I want to own the table. I want to own the whole damn restaurant. And if a few lonely men have to sell their cars to make that happen, that's just the cost of doing business. It's the price of my empowerment. She turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. You should let this go. The world you believed in doesn't exist anymore. You lost, and then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence in the apartment was deafening. I stood there for a long time, looking at the stack of papers on my table. Proof of what my daughter had become. Proof of what my ideals had been twisted into. She was right about one thing. I had lost. We all had. We fought for a world of equals, and we got a world of predators and prey, just with new justifications. We wanted to free women from being seen as objects, only to watch our own daughters learn to see men as objects, objects to be used, manipulated, and discarded. I can't change her. I can't undo the damage she's done to Kevin and who knows how many others. All I can do is tell the story. So here I am, typing this out to strangers on the internet, because I need someone to know that this new feminism, this cold, transactional, cruel ideology that my daughter espouses, it's not what we fought for. It's the furthest thing from it. I fought for women to have a voice. I never thought they'd use it to lie so beautifully.